My son's voice was shaking when he called. "Dad, I'm getting divorced. She's going to take 60% of everything, maybe more." It was 9:47 on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my desk in the study, the same desk I had worked at for 19 years, and I was already looking at the folder. I had been looking at it for almost a year. The folder was manila, the kind you buy in bulk at any office supply store, but this one had gone soft at the edges from being opened and closed too many times. There were 4 tabs along the top: blue, red, yellow, green, and a silver paperclip on the outside that I'd put there 8 months ago, when the documents inside had finally reached a number I considered complete. I didn't touch it while Michael was talking. I just let it sit there under the lamp. He kept going. He told me Lauren had already retained an attorney, that the filing was happening Thursday, that her side was claiming joint contribution to every asset accumulated during the marriage, the condo on Harrington, the investment accounts, the deferred compensation he'd been building since his 2nd year at the firm. He said the number she was asking for was not theoretical. He said he didn't know what to do. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "Don't worry, son, I think you're going to be fine." There was a pause. He said, "Dad, she could take everything." I said, "I know." He waited for more. I didn't give him more. I told him to get some sleep and called Patricia first thing in the morning. Patricia Wren, his attorney. I'd looked her up 6 months ago, read 3 years of her case history, and decided she was exactly who Michael would need when this moment arrived. I didn't tell him that either. After we hung up, I sat for a while without moving. The folder was still there. I opened it once, checked the tab I'd marked green, the one at the back, and then closed it again. I turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. 3 days later, he called back. It was just past 8 in the morning. His voice wasn't shaking this time. It was something else, quieter and faster, the way a person sounds when they've just seen something they don't have a word for yet. He said, "Dad, how did she get those emails?" I looked out the window. The street below was already moving cabs, a delivery truck, 2 women walking fast in the same direction, a city that doesn't stop for anything. I said, "Tell me what Patricia said." My son first called me about his marriage almost a year before the morning his voice changed. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember because I had just come back from a walk along the river, something I do when the weather is still holding before winter closes in, and my phone was ringing on the kitchen counter when I came through the door. I didn't recognize the particular quality of Michael's voice right away. He's a careful speaker, measured in the way that good lawyers learn to be, choosing words before committing to them. But that evening, there was something underneath the words that he hadn't chosen at all. He said Lauren had become distant, that they'd been living in the same apartment for 8 years, and lately he felt like he was living with someone he'd met on a plane, polite, surface level, always slightly elsewhere. He said he didn't know when it had started. He said maybe it had been building for a long time and he just hadn't been paying attention. I listened. I didn't offer a theory. I didn't tell him that distance in a marriage is sometimes a symptom and sometimes the whole disease. I just let him talk until he ran out of words. And then I said I was glad he'd called. And I meant it. I had known Lauren for 8 years. She'd come into Michael's life when he was still grinding through his 2nd year of associate work, long hours. Low sleep, the kind of stretch that reveals whether a person has real endurance or just the appearance of it. Lauren had been patient through those years. She'd moved cities for him once, left a job she liked, rebuilt her marketing career in a new office with new people. I'd watched her do all of that without complaint, and I had thought to myself, this is a woman who understands what it costs to build something. I thought they would last. I didn't say any of that to Michael on that Tuesday in October. I just listened, and when we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking at the lights across the street, and I thought about the years I'd spent in property management, 31 years of reading contracts, evaluating risk, learning that the most important information is almost never what people say first. It's what they don't say, what they circle around, what they mention once and then move away from quickly. Michael had mentioned Lauren's name 14 times in that call. He had not once said he thought she was unhappy. I filed that away and went to bed. The second call came a month later. It was a Sunday morning, early enough that the coffee was still brewing when the phone rang. Michael's voice was different this time, not the measured, careful voice, not even the uncertain voice from October. This was something stripped down, the way a person sounds after a long night of sitting with something they don't want to be true. He said, "Dad, I found out Lauren's been having an affair with her supervisor. It's been going on for at least 6 months." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the silence sit, because I've learned that silence makes people say things they wouldn't otherwise say, things that are more accurate than what they'd prepared. He said, "I don't know what to do. If I file, she's going to go after everything. She knows exactly what I make. She knows the accounts. She knows the property. She's been in this marriage for 8 years, and she knows where every dollar is." I said, "Do you have anything documented?" He said he had some emails, that he'd been CC'd on a thread months ago that he hadn't understood at the time, and now he did. He said he'd forwarded them to himself. He said he didn't know if they were enough. I told him to sit with it for a few days before he did anything. I told him that decisions made in the first 48 hours after a discovery like this are usually the ones people regret. He said he knew that. He said he was a lawyer. I told him I knew he was a lawyer, and that was exactly why he should wait. We hung up. I poured my coffee, and I stood at the window, and I thought about Patricia Nguyen, who had managed the family's financial and legal affairs for 11 years, who had handled my wife's estate and my retirement transfers and 3 separate property transactions without a single error. Patricia was not a divorce attorney, but she understood asset structures the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not just what things are, but how they connect, where the pressure points are, what moves quietly, and what makes noise. I called her that afternoon. I told her what Michael had told me. I told her I wasn't asking her to intervene in his marriage or to contact him directly or to do anything that would take the decision out of his hands. I said I need to make sure that when my son is ready to act, he has everything he needs. Patricia asked me what I had access to. I told her that Michael had shared his email account with me 2 years earlier, during a period when he'd been traveling constantly for a case and needed someone to monitor correspondence about a property he'd co-signed with me. He'd never revoked the access. I hadn't used it since. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Send me what you find." Over the next several weeks, I went through those emails carefully, not quickly carefully, the way I used to review lease agreements, looking not just for what was there, but for what was missing, for the gaps and the patterns. The emails between Michael and Lauren were ordinary on the surface, but the emails between Lauren and a man named Garrett, her supervisor at the firm where she worked, were not ordinary at all. They went back 11 months. They were specific. They were in several places, explicit about timing and about what Lauren had told Garrett regarding the marriage, regarding Michael's income, regarding what she expected to walk away with if things went the way she planned. I forwarded everything to Patricia. Patricia, for her part, ran a quiet audit of the joint accounts. What she found took her 2 weeks to document fully. Lauren had been moving money not large amounts at once, nothing that would trigger an automatic flag, but consistent transfers over 14 months into a personal account that Michael had no visibility into. The total, by the time Patricia had traced it completely, was just over $41,000. Patricia called me when she had the full picture. She said, "David, your son needs to know about this, but he needs to know it at the right moment, through the right channel, or it gets complicated." I told her I agreed. I told her I wasn't going to call Michael and tell him myself. I was going to wait until he was ready to fight, and then I was going to make sure he had everything he needed to win. I put everything in a folder. I labeled the tabs. The green tab at the back was the financial audit. The blue tab in the middle was the emails. I set the folder on my desk and I left it there. And every few days I would look at it and think about my son sitting in that apartment across the city, trying to figure out what to do next. I believed he would figure it out. I had raised him to figure things out. I just wanted to make sure that when he did, he wouldn't be walking into that fight empty-handed. Michael called me on a Tuesday evening. He said he'd made a reservation at Caruso's, the Italian place on Lexington he and Lauren had used for anniversaries, which struck me as an odd choice, but I didn't say so. He said he wanted everyone there. His words, everyone. Lauren's mother, Diane, a few friends, me. He said he was going to tell them about the divorce in person, that he owed people that much. I told him I'd be there at 7. I arrived at 6:45. The host, a young woman named Rosaria, who had worked that room for at least 4 years, showed me to the private dining area in the back. The table was set for 8. Lauren was already seated at the far end, and Diane was next to her. 2 of their shared friends, a couple I recognized from Michael and Lauren's wedding, sat across from them. No Michael yet. Lauren looked up when I walked in. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that knows something. I sat down at my end of the table. Rosaria brought water. I thanked her. Lauren began talking before I had unfolded my napkin. She was telling Diane and the couple their names were Greg and Steph. I remembered now that the situation had become untenable. That was her word, untenable. She said Michael had failed her in ways she couldn't enumerate in polite company. She said she had given him 7 years. 7 years of her career slowed down, her ambitions set aside, her social life narrowed to fit the shape of his schedule. She said she had sacrificed. And she said that word carefully, the way people say words they've been rehearsing. She said she deserved everything that was coming to her. Greg nodded slowly. Steph looked at her water glass. Diane put her hand over Lauren's hand on the table. Then Lauren looked directly at me. She said, "David, I know you have resources. I know the family has assets." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "Michael is going to need help meeting what he owes me. 60% is what my attorney says is fair. Given everything I've contributed, if he can't manage it, I'll have no choice but to pursue it through the courts. All of it. Publicly." The table went very quiet. I could hear the kitchen through the wall, the sound of something being set on a metal surface. My neighbor, a man named Terrence, who had lived 2 floors below me for 11 years, and whom I had invited because Michael had specifically asked for people who knew the family, was seated to my left. He had come as a favor. He shifted in his chair. I felt him look at me and then look away. I didn't say anything. I picked up my water glass. I drank. I set it back down. I looked at Lauren the way I used to look at a property report when I suspected the numbers had been adjusted steadily, without urgency, reading what was actually there instead of what was being presented. She held my gaze for about 3 seconds and then looked back at Diane. Michael arrived at 7:12. I know because I checked my watch when I heard the door. He came in still in his coat, and I could see from the way he read the room that he understood immediately something had already happened. He looked at Lauren. He looked at me. He sat down in the empty chair between Greg and Steph. Lauren didn't wait. She said, "I was just telling your father what we've discussed with our attorneys." Michael said he hadn't discussed anything with any attorney yet. Lauren said that was fine because hers had already filed the preliminary paperwork. She said she wanted 60% of the apartment, of the investment accounts, of the profit sharing from his firm. She said she had documented everything she had contributed to the marriage, and she was prepared to make that documentation public if Michael chose to contest it. Then she said, "And I'll tell them about the incident in March, in writing, to the Bar Association if I have to." Michael's face went the color of the tablecloth. He said, "Lauren, nothing happened in March." His voice was flat and careful, the voice of a man who had spent years learning to control what his face did in a room. Lauren said, "That's not how I remember it." Diane looked down at her plate. Greg said, very quietly, that maybe this wasn't the right setting. Lauren said she thought it was exactly the right setting, because she wanted everyone to understand what she had been dealing with. Terrence pushed his chair back about an inch. He didn't stand. He just created a small amount of distance between himself and the table, the way a person does when they're calculating how long they need to stay before they can leave without it being a statement. I ate my bread. I watched Lauren. I watched Michael watching Lauren. I thought about the folder on my desk, the green tab, and the blue tab, and I thought about how many times I had sat in rooms like this one, rooms where someone was presenting a version of the numbers that didn't match the underlying documents, and how the only thing that ever mattered in those situations was what the documents actually said. The dinner ended before the entrees arrived. Lauren stood first. Diane followed. They left without saying goodbye to me, which I noted. She called me the next morning at 8:15. I was at my desk with the folder in front of me and a coffee I hadn't touched yet. I recognized her number. I let it ring once before I answered. Her voice was more composed than it had been at the restaurant, which told me she had prepared for this call. She said, "David, I want to be straightforward with you. I think you should know where things stand." I said, "All right." "Michael is going to need to settle," she said. "My attorney has reviewed everything, the contribution analysis, the duration, the career adjustments I made when we moved for his position. 60% is not an opening number. It's what the record supports." She paused. "I'm telling you this because I know Michael will ask you for help. And I want you to understand, you don't have a role in this. You're his father. That's not the same as being a party to this marriage." Another pause. Shorter. "You never really understood what we built together. That's not a criticism. You just weren't there for most of it." I looked at the folder. The silver paper clip on the outside caught the light from the desk lamp. I had put that paper clip there 8 months ago when the documents inside had finally reached a number I considered complete. I said, "Thank you for calling, Lauren." She said, "I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to be clear." I said, "You've been very clear." She hung up. I set the phone down. I looked at the paperclip for a moment. Then I opened the folder to the green tab, the financial audit, and checked the total that Patricia had documented. $84,620, moved in 31 transfers over 11 months, into an account Lauren had opened alone. I closed the folder. I drank the coffee. It was cold. I didn't call Patricia that morning. There was nothing new to tell her. I just sat at the desk for a while, in the particular quiet of a room where someone has just told you exactly who they are, and went to work. Michael walked me to the elevator. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which was probably accurate. He said, "Dad, you saw what just happened in there." It wasn't really a question. I told him I had. He said, "She's going to say I hit her. She's going to say it to the Bar Association. She'll destroy everything I've built." He stopped. "What do I do?" I pressed the elevator button. I said, "I saw everything. Son, let me handle it." He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 12 years old and had broken something and wasn't sure yet whether it was fixable. The elevator came. I got in. I told him to get some sleep. On the drive home, I passed the exit for Lexington twice before I took it. The city was quiet in the way it gets after 10 on a weeknight, not empty, just reduced. I parked in my building's garage and sat in the car for a few minutes. Terrence's car was already back in his spot. I thought about Lauren's face when she said the word sacrificed, the way she'd said it like a deed of ownership. I thought about Michael's voice in the hallway, the flatness of it, the control. He had learned that from somewhere. I went upstairs. I turned on the desk lamp. I looked at the folder. The blue tab was still in the middle. The green tab was still at the back. Everything was still exactly where I had left it. My phone showed 11:47 when I sat down at the desk. I didn't turn on any other lights. The folder was in front of me, and the city was doing what it does at that hour, pressing itself against the windows in long amber lines. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything, but reminds you that other people are still moving. I opened the folder to the blue tab. The first document was a forwarded email chain, printed on plain paper, time-stamped 14 months ago. I had read it so many times that I knew which line was on which page. I didn't read it again. I just looked at the top of the first page, where the sender's name appeared in small gray font, and I thought about Lauren's voice at the dinner table, the word sacrificed, the way she'd aimed it. Then I closed the folder, picked up my phone, and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. Patricia Okafor had been a family law attorney for 22 years, working out of a firm on Broad Street with 3 partners and a reputation for being meticulous to the point that opposing counsel sometimes called her difficult. I had been referred to her by a colleague 8 years ago for an unrelated matter involving an estate dispute, and I had kept her number when I first called her about Michael's situation 11 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 3 days after Michael had called me from his car outside the office and said he didn't know what to do about Lauren. Patricia had listened for 14 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Tell me what you have." I told her. She said, "Get me the originals." Now she said, "David, late call." I said, "It's time." There was a pause on her end. I heard her shift in her chair. She worked late. Always had. She said, "The dinner was tonight." Yes. And I told her about the restaurant, about Lauren's speech, about Michael's face, about the word sacrificed, and the way the table had gone quiet, and the way Michael had sat with his hands flat on the tablecloth and said nothing at all. Patricia listened the way she always listened, completely, without filling the silence with reassurance. When I finished, she said, "Okay, I'll send everything to Michael's personal email tomorrow morning. The full package, email chains, the transferred documentation, the financial summary, all of it." I said, "He needs to understand where it came from. He needs to know it came from you, not from me." "I know," she said. "That was always the plan." Patricia. Yes. "Thank you." She said, "Get some sleep, David." Then she hung up. I sat at the desk for another few minutes. The amber light from the city pressed against the window. I turned off the lamp, went to bed, and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made coffee at 6:15 and took it to the window. The folder was still on the desk behind me. I didn't look at it. I had spent 11 months looking at it, and there was nothing left to learn from it. What happened next was not mine to watch over. I went to work. My office was on the 23rd floor of a building on Market Street, and my job for the past 19 years had been managing commercial property portfolios, leases, maintenance contracts, tenant relations, the slow arithmetic of buildings and what they cost to keep standing. It is work that requires patience above almost everything else. You learn, over 19 years, that most problems that look urgent in the morning look different by afternoon, and that most of the damage people do to buildings is not malicious. It's just the result of not paying attention. People stop paying attention and things deteriorate. I had always found it easier to pay attention. My assistant, a man named Gerald Cho, who had been with me for 6 years, put a coffee on my desk at 8:30 and said there were 2 lease renewals waiting for signatures. I signed them. I reviewed a maintenance report for a property on Chestnut Street. I returned 3 calls. At 11:40, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Michael. I let it ring twice, then I picked up. His voice was different from the night before. The flatness was gone. There was something underneath it now, not anger exactly, but the particular quality that comes when a person has been holding a belief about their own situation and then discovered the belief was incomplete. He said, "Dad." I said, "Michael." "Patricia sent me an email this morning." He stopped. I heard him exhale slowly. "She sent me everything. The emails, the bank records, a financial summary going back 18 months. Another pause. "Dad, there are wire transfers. 11 of them. She moved money from our joint account to an account I didn't know existed. Over $40,000. And the emails." He stopped again. I waited. "The emails go back 14 months, he said, before she ever mentioned divorce, before any of this." His voice was very careful. He was a lawyer. He knew how to control his voice in difficult situations, but I could hear the effort it was taking. "Dad, how long have you known about this?" I said, "About a year." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. I counted 4 seconds of it before he spoke again. "A year," he said. Not a question. He was repeating it the way you repeat something when you're trying to locate it correctly in your understanding of events. "Yes." "Since when exactly?" "Since the first time you called me, from your car, last March." Another silence, shorter this time. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I had thought about this question for 11 months. Not the answer I had always known the answer. I had thought about how to say it in a way that was true without being a speech. I said, because you needed to find out from someone who wasn't me. What does that mean? It means that if I had called you in March and said, Michael, I believe your wife is moving money, and I have evidence of an affair, what would you have done? He didn't answer right away. I gave him the time. I would have thought you were overreacting, he said finally, or that you didn't like Lauren. Yes, I said. I would have defended her. Yes. I heard him breathe. So you waited. I waited until you made the decision yourself, until you called me and told me you were done. And then I had Patricia ready to move. I paused. What you received this morning came from a licensed family law attorney with 22 years of experience. It came with documentation. It came with a financial summary prepared by a forensic accountant she brought in last month. It did not come from your father, who might have had reasons to be biased. Do you understand the difference? The silence this time was different. It wasn't resistant. It was the silence of a person recalibrating. Michael said, "You were protecting me?" I said, "I was making sure that when the moment came, you would have what you needed from a source you couldn't dismiss." But you could have, he stopped himself. I heard him almost say it. You could have told me sooner. You could have warned me and then catch it, because he was a lawyer and he understood what I had just explained to him, and he was already working through the logic of it. He said, "If you'd told me in March, I would have confronted her. She would have hidden the money better. The emails might have been deleted." Patricia believes so, I said. She told me as much when we spoke last night. You called her last night. After I got home. Another pause. After the dinner. Yes. I heard him sit down somewhere, the sound of a chair, a small adjustment. He said, quietly, "I didn't know she had moved that much money. 40,000. Dad, I knew things weren't right, but I didn't know." He stopped. I said nothing. I had learned, a long time ago, that there are moments when saying nothing is the only thing that doesn't take something away from the person speaking. After a moment, he said, "The emails. It started before she ever brought up the divorce. She had already decided. She was already planning it while we were still," he stopped again, "while we were still trying." "I know," I said. "Did you read them?" Patricia summarized them for me. I didn't need to read them. Okay. His voice had settled into something harder now, not cold, but resolved, the quality a person's voice gets when they've stopped being surprised and started thinking about what comes next. Patricia says this changes the asset division significantly. If Lauren's attorney was building a case for 60% based on contribution and duration, the transfers undermine that argument entirely. And the emails. Patricia will walk you through it, I said. She already has. She sent a memo with the documents. A brief pause. She's good. She's very good. There was a silence between us then, not the weighted kind, not the recalibrating kind, just a pause between two people who have said what needed to be said and are finding where to put it. Michael said, "Thank you, Dad." I said, "Now go win." He said, "Yeah." And then, after a moment, "Yeah, I will." We hung up. I set the phone down on my desk and looked at the lease renewal sitting in my out tray, signed and ready for Gerald to collect. Outside the window, 23 floors down, a delivery truck was double parked on Market Street, and a cab was working around it with the patience of long practice. Gerald knocked and came in at 12:15 to collect the signed documents. He was 31 years old and had a habit of reading the room before he said anything, a quality I had always appreciated. He looked at my face, looked at the phone on the desk, and said, "Anything else you need this morning?" I said, "No, I think we're in good shape." He nodded and left, closing the door behind him with the particular care of someone who understands that quiet is sometimes a form of courtesy. I turned back to the window. The delivery truck was gone. The cab was gone. The street had rearranged itself into its ordinary pattern, as streets do, as cities do, as most things do when you give them enough time and don't force them. I thought about Michael's voice at the end of the call. The yeah, the second yeah, quieter, more certain. The difference between a man who has just been handed a weapon and a man who has decided to use it. That was the part I had been waiting for. Not the documents had been ready for months. Not the phone call, I had known the phone call was coming since the night before. The part I had been waiting for was that second yeah, the one that meant he was ready. I had a property inspection at 2 o'clock on Arch Street. I gathered my coat, told Gerald I'd be back by 4, and took the elevator down. I didn't hear from Michael for 4 days after that call. That wasn't unusual. When Michael was processing something, he went quiet, not avoidant, just quiet. He had done it as a boy when he was working through a problem at school, and he did it now. I had learned, over 34 years, to read the quality of his silences. The silence after Patricia's letter was a working silence. He was reading, thinking, preparing. I let it run. On the 5th day, my phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. I was at my desk with coffee, reviewing a building assessment for a property on Delaware Avenue. I recognized the number, not Michael's, Lauren's. I let it ring twice before I answered. Her voice was different from the last time I had heard it. The last time Thanksgiving. 2 years ago, she had been warm, composed, asking me about my work with the particular interest of someone who has been coached to seem interested. That warmth was gone now. What was left was something harder, and underneath the hardness, something I recognized as fear trying to sound like anger. She said, "David, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you help Michael access my email account?" I set down my coffee. The building assessment was still open on my desk. I kept my eyes on it. "Lauren," I said, "Michael forwarded me emails he had received. That's all." "That's not all," she said. "You know what I'm talking about." "I know what you're asking," I said. "The answer is the same. Michael sent me emails that were sent to him, or that he had access to through a shared account. I reviewed them. I passed them to Patricia. That's the sequence of events." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "That's illegal," she said. "That's a privacy violation. My attorney is going to—" "Your attorney," I said, "should speak with Patricia. That's what attorneys are for." I paused. "Lauren, I don't think this call is a good idea. Not for either of us. I'd recommend you speak with your counsel before you make any more of them." I didn't say it unkindly. I said it the way I would say it to a client who was about to make a decision that would cost them more than they understood. She hung up. I finished the building assessment. At 9 o'clock, Michael called. "She called you," he said. It wasn't a question. "She did." "She called me first," he said. "Last night. She said the emails were obtained illegally and that her attorney was going to file a motion to suppress." He paused. "Patricia already anticipated that. She sent me a memo this morning. The account was a joint account. My name was on it from when we first set it up in 2019. I never removed it. Lauren assumed I had, but I hadn't. Patricia says the motion won't survive a basic review." I said, "That sounds right." She also said he stopped. "Lauren also said that you had coached me, that you'd been planning this for months, and that you manipulated me into filing." I waited. "I told her," Michael said, "that you gave me a folder, that I opened it, that everything in it was true, and that the decision to file was mine." He paused again. "I told her that my father doesn't manipulate people. He just makes sure they have what they need." I looked at the window. The light on Delaware Avenue was flat and gray, the kind of February light that makes everything look like it's waiting for something. How did she respond? I asked. "She said I was naive," Michael said, and then she hung up. We were quiet for a moment. Then Michael said, "Patricia wants to meet Thursday. She says we're in a strong position." "Good," I said. "Dad," he stopped. How long ago did you start putting that folder together?" "A while," I said. He didn't push it. That was the right answer for both of us. And he knew it. We said goodbye, and I went back to the Delaware Avenue assessment. The call I was not expecting came 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, While I was in the elevator of a building on Chestnut Street, returning from a roof inspection, my phone showed a number I didn't recognize, a Philadelphia area code, but not one in my contacts. I answered it in the lobby, standing near the front desk while the building superintendent, a man named Roy, who had managed that property for 16 years, sorted through a stack of maintenance requests at the counter. The voice on the other end was older, careful, a woman's voice. "Is this David?" she said. "David, Michael's father." "It is," I said. "This is Elaine Marsh," she said, "Lauren's mother." I had met Elaine Marsh twice. Once at the engagement party 5 years ago. In a restaurant in Center City, she had been pleasant, a little formal, the kind of woman who chose her words the way she chose her clothes, deliberately and without waste. Once at the wedding, where she had stood in the receiving line and held my hand for a moment and said, "Take care of each other." I had liked her both times. I had thought about that, sometimes, over the past year. "Mrs. Marsh," I said, "how are you?" "Not well," she said, and the directness of it, no preamble, no social cushion, told me something about the state she was in. I've been trying to decide whether to make this call for 3 weeks. I want you to know that." Roy looked up from his maintenance request, glanced at me, looked back down. I moved toward the far end of the lobby, near the mailboxes. "I appreciate you calling," I said. "I know what Lauren did," Elaine said. "I don't mean I suspect it. I mean I know it. She told me not deliberately, not all at once, but over the past 2 years, things came out. The man she was seeing, the money she moved. She thought I wouldn't understand what she was telling me, or that I wouldn't put it together." A pause. "I put it together." I said nothing. I had learned, over 40 years of working with people in difficult circumstances, that silence at this moment was not coldness. It was respect. It meant I am listening, and I will not interrupt what it cost you to say this. "I called Michael yesterday," Elaine said. "I told him what I know. I told him I would testify, if it comes to that. He was." She stopped. "He didn't say much." "That's how he processes things," I said. "He sounds like you," she said. "Lauren always said that. She meant it as a criticism." A pause. "I don't think it is." I looked at the mailboxes. Someone had taped a notice about a package delivery to the wall beside them. The tape was already peeling at one corner. "Mrs. Marsh," I said, "I want you to understand that what you're offering is not a small thing. Lauren is your daughter." "She is," Elaine said. "And what she did to Michael is not a small thing, either." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind the steadiness, not suppressed emotion, but emotion that had been carried long enough to become something quieter and more permanent. I raised her better than this. I don't know where it went wrong, but I'm not going to sit on the other side of a courtroom from the truth because she's my daughter. I'm 67 years old. I don't have the patience for that anymore. I said, "Thank you, Elaine." "Thank you," she said, "for protecting your son. Someone should have been doing it sooner." She paused. "I'm sorry it wasn't me." We said goodbye. I stood in the lobby for a moment after the call ended. Roy was still at the front desk. He had finished with the maintenance requests and was now entering something into a computer. He didn't look up. I took the elevator back upstairs to finish the roof inspection notes. That evening, I called Patricia's office and left a message for her assistant, Elaine Marsh. Lauren's mother had offered to testify. Her contact information would follow by email. Patricia called back within the hour. Her voice had the particular quality it got when something she had calculated as a long shot had come in. Not surprise. Exactly. But a kind of professional satisfaction. "This changes the weight of the proceeding," she said, significantly. "I thought it might," I said. The following Monday, Lauren called Michael for the last time. Michael told me about it that evening. He had been at his office on Market Street. He had gone back to the office 2 weeks ago, which I took as a sign that the worst of it was behind him when she called at 4:30. He stepped into a conference room. His paralegal, a young woman named Dana, who had worked with him for 3 years, had been in the hallway when he came out. He told me Dana's face when he walked back to his desk was the face of someone who had heard enough through the conference room wall to understand that something had shifted. Lauren had said, "I know I was wrong." She had said it plainly, without the rehearsed quality her voice usually carried. She had said, "I know what I did with the money was wrong. I know the emails were wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I didn't know what I was doing, because I did." She had stopped for a moment. Then she had said, "But I'm still scared. Michael, I gave up things too. Real things. And I don't know how to start over with nothing." She had started to cry, then not the way she cried in arguments, the quick, strategic kind, but something slower and less controlled. He had let her finish, and then she had said, "I'll drop the 60% claim. I'll take what I came in with and nothing more. I just need you to make this stop." Michael had said, "The court date is set. Lauren." She had said, "Please, Michael, please. I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes, but I don't want to go through a hearing. I don't want my mother standing up there." And she stopped. She had started to cry. He recognized the crying. He had seen it before, in arguments, in difficult conversations over the years. He told me that this time it sounded different, less like a tactic, more like someone who had finally understood the distance between where they were and where they thought they would be. He had said, very quietly, "It's too late. Lauren, the court date is set. Patricia is ready. You should talk to your attorney." And then he had ended the call. He told me this without drama, standing in his kitchen with a glass of water on the counter in front of him. He told it the way he told me about cases, sometimes methodically, in sequence, without editorializing. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She asked me if you had planned all of this." I said, "What did you tell her?" He said, "I told her I didn't know, and that it didn't matter." He picked up the glass of water. "I told her that whatever my father did, he did because he was trying to protect me, and that whatever happened next, I was going to be okay." He drank, set the glass down. "I think that's true." I looked at the counter, the window above the sink, the small plant on the windowsill that I had given him when he moved into this apartment 2 years ago, which he had somehow kept alive. "I think so too," I said. He nodded. He asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. I told him I had a property walk through in the morning and needed to review the file tonight. He said he understood. I drove home on the same roads I had been driving for years. The city looked the same as it always did at night, the lit windows, the bridges over the Schuylkill, the particular orange of the streetlights on the older blocks. I thought about Elaine Marsh's voice on the phone. Someone should have been doing it sooner. "I'm sorry it wasn't me." I thought about Lauren in a conference room somewhere, on the phone with her attorney, trying to understand how she had arrived at this particular Thursday. I thought about Michael saying, "Whatever my father did, he did because he was trying to protect me." He was right about that. He was right in a way that I hadn't needed him to say out loud, but that I was glad he had said. I got home at 8:15. The building assessment for Arch Street was still on my desk, along with a note I had left myself about a permit filing due on Friday. I sat down, opened the file, and started where I had left off. The courtroom on the 4th floor of the Civil Justice Center smelled like old carpet and central heating that had been running since October. I had been in that building 11 times over the course of my career: permit disputes, easement filings, one estate matter that had taken 3 years to resolve, and it always smelled exactly the same. I found a seat in the 3rd row of the gallery, on the left side, near the aisle. I set my coat on my lap and waited. Patricia had told Michael to arrive by 8:45. He was there at 8:30, in a dark gray suit I hadn't seen before, sitting at the plaintiff's table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. I had taught him that when he was 16, keep your hands visible, keep them still. It signals that you have nothing to hide. He didn't know I was watching him do it now. Or maybe he did and didn't look back because he understood that looking back was not what this morning required. Lauren arrived at 8:50 with her attorney, a man named Garrett who had a reputation in the city for taking cases that should have settled and making them expensive. She wore a cream-colored blazer and had her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had thought carefully about how she wanted to appear. She sat down at the defendant's table without looking at Michael. She did look at the gallery once, briefly. and I watched her eyes move across the rows of seats. They passed over me without stopping. That was fine. I was not what she was looking for. Seated 2 rows behind me, on the right side of the gallery, was a woman I recognized from the photograph Michael had described to me 6 weeks earlier. She was in her late 60s, small-framed, with white hair and a dark coat buttoned to the collar. Her name was Evelyn. She was Lauren's mother. I had not known she would be there. I had not arranged for her to be there. She had come on her own. And I understood from that single fact, the fact of her presence, that the next hour was going to be different from what Lauren had prepared for. Judge Harlan took the bench at 9:02. He was 65 years old, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 25 years listening to people tell him the worst versions of each other. He had a reputation for patience and for a very low tolerance for anything that wasted his time. He set his reading glasses on and opened the case file without ceremony. He said, "We're here on the matter of Callaway versus Callaway. Final dissolution hearing. Equitable distribution. Counsel. Are we ready?" Both attorneys said yes. He said, "Then let's begin." Patricia stood first. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they have spent a week preparing for something and are no longer afraid of it. She said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff will demonstrate today that the defendant engaged in a pattern of financial misconduct during the marriage, including unauthorized transfers from joint accounts, and that the defendant's claim to 60% of marital assets is not supported by the record and is, in fact, contradicted by it." She paused. "We will also present evidence relevant to fault under Pennsylvania statute, which the plaintiff believes the court will find material to the distribution determination." Lauren's attorney, Garrett, objected to the framing. Judge Harlan said, "Noted. Proceed." Patricia submitted the first exhibit. It appeared on the screen mounted to the left of the bench, a spreadsheet of account transactions, organized by date, going back 14 months. The courtroom was quiet while Judge Harlan reviewed it. He asked 2 clarifying questions about the account structure. Patricia answered both. Then she submitted the second exhibit. The second exhibit was a series of wire transfer records, 31 transfers over 11 months, totaling a number that I had already committed to memory, $84,620. The transfers went to an account that was not joint, not in Michael's name, and not disclosed in Lauren's financial affidavit. Patricia pointed this out with the particular neutrality of someone who does not need to editorialize because the facts are already doing the work. Judge Harlan wrote something down. He looked at Garrett. He said, "Counsel, was this account disclosed?" Garrett said they had documentation. Judge Harlan said, "I'll see it." The third exhibit went up on the screen. I had seen it before, a printout of the email thread, 19 messages, beginning in March of the previous year. The sender's address was Lawrence. The recipient's address belonged to a man whose name appeared in the thread 17 times. The content of the messages was not ambiguous. Patricia did not read them aloud. She did not need to. Judge Harlan read several of them in silence, and the expression on his face did not change. But he took longer than he had taken with the financial documents. When he finished, he set the exhibit down and looked at Lauren over the rim of his glasses. Lauren's attorney was already on his feet. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has not established the chain of custody for these documents. We have reason to believe they may have been obtained improperly, and we intend to challenge their authenticity." Judge Harlan said, "On what basis do you challenge authenticity?" Garrett said, "The defendant maintains these emails were fabricated." Judge Harlan looked at the exhibit again. He looked at the metadata Patricia had included on the final page server timestamps, header information, the forwarding record that showed the thread had been recovered from a server backup through a process that Patricia's technical consultant had documented in a 12-page affidavit submitted the previous Thursday. Judge Harlan said, "Counsel, I've reviewed the authentication documentation. If you have a specific technical challenge to the server records, I'll hear it. Otherwise, I'm going to treat this exhibit as admissible and move forward." Garrett said they would reserve the right to challenge. Judge Harlan said that was their right. He moved forward. Lauren had been very still during all of this. She was still now. She was looking at the surface of the table in front of her, and I could see from the third row that her jaw was set and her left hand, which was resting on the edge of the table, had the particular tension of someone who is working very hard not to move. Then Evelyn stood up. She stood slowly, the way people stand when they have thought carefully about whether to stand at all, and when she was upright, she said, in a voice that was quiet but entirely clear, "Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to say something." Judge Harlan looked at her. "Ma'am, are you a party to this proceeding?" "No, sir. I'm Lauren's mother. My name is Evelyn Marsh. I'm in the gallery." She paused. "I know this isn't the way things are done, but I need to say something, and I don't think I'll get another chance." Garrett was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." Judge Harlan raised one hand. He looked at Evelyn for a moment. He said, "Mrs. Marsh, I'm going to ask you to sit down, and I'm going to ask plaintiff's counsel whether they intend to call you as a witness." Patricia said, "Your Honor, we were not aware Mrs. Marsh was present. If the court is willing to allow brief testimony, we would formally request it." Judge Harlan considered this for about 4 seconds. He said, "Counsel for the defense." Garrett looked at Lauren. Lauren was looking at her mother. I could not see Lauren's face from where I was sitting, but I could see Evelyn's, and Evelyn was not looking away. Judge Harlan said, "I'll allow it. Mrs. Marsh, please approach." Evelyn walked to the witness stand with the careful steadiness of someone who has made a decision and intends to carry it through. She was sworn in. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. Patricia asked her to state her relationship to the defendant. She said she was Lauren's mother. Patricia asked if she had any personal knowledge relevant to the proceedings. Evelyn said yes. Patricia asked her to describe it. Evelyn said, "Lauren told me about the relationship in February. She told me herself. She said it had been going on for about a year. She said she was going to leave Michael anyway, and that the money she'd been moving was for when she left." She stopped. I told her she needed to be honest. She told me she would handle it her way. She paused again, and her voice was steady, but she was not looking at Lauren anymore. She was looking at the bench. She didn't handle it honestly, and I can't sit here and watch her say these things are false when I know they're not. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt different from the quiet that had preceded it. It was the quiet of a room in which something had been said that could not be unsaid. Lauren said from the defendant's table, "Mom, just that word, just the one." Evelyn did not respond. Judge Harlan looked at Lauren for a long moment. He said, "Ms. Calloway, your mother has testified, under oath, to facts that directly contradict your counsel's characterization of the evidence in this case. I want you to understand the weight of that." He paused. "She is your mother, and she is sitting in that chair." He let that settle for a moment. Then he said, "We're going to take a 15-minute recess." I stayed in my seat during the recess. Michael walked past me once, toward the water fountain near the back wall, and he looked at me when he passed. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. There was nothing that needed to be said in that particular corridor at that particular moment, and we both understood that. When the hearing resumed, Judge Harlan took 11 minutes to deliver his determination. He spoke in the flat, precise language of a man who has read the same statutes several hundred times and no longer needs to search for the words. He found the financial transfers to be unauthorized withdrawals from marital property. He found the email evidence credible and authenticated. He found Evelyn's testimony material. He determined that fault, as established under Pennsylvania law, was relevant to the distribution calculation in this case. The final order, Michael would retain the marital residence and the primary investment accounts. Lauren would repay $84,620 to the marital estate, to be settled within 90 days. Lauren would bear responsibility for Michael's legal fees, to be calculated and submitted within 30 days. Lauren's claim to 60% of marital assets was denied in its entirety. Lauren did not cry immediately. She sat very still while Garrett leaned over and spoke to her in a low voice. And then she gathered her things, and it was only when she stood up that I saw her face clearly for the first time that morning. She looked the way people look when they have spent a long time believing that the story would end differently, and the ending has arrived, and it is not the one they prepared for. Evelyn left the gallery before Lauren reached the aisle. I watched her walk out. She did not look back. Michael found me outside in the corridor near the elevator bank while Patricia was finishing the paperwork at the clerk's window. He stood in front of me, and for a moment he didn't say anything, and I let the silence be what it was. Then he said, "Dad." He put his arms around me, and I put mine around him, and we stood there for a moment in that corridor that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. He said, "Thank you. You saved me." I stepped back and looked at him. He was 34 years old, and he looked tired in the particular way that people look tired when something that has been pressing on them for a long time has finally lifted. I said, "I didn't save you. You walked into that room. You sat at that table. You let Patricia do her job with what we had." I paused. I just made sure the field was level before you got there. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "That's not a small thing." I said, "No, it isn't." Patricia came out of the clerk's office with a folder under her arm and her coat over her other arm. She shook Michael's hand, and then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Calloway," I said. "Patricia," she said, "the documentation was clean. Whoever put that together did good work." I told her I was glad it held up. She said it did more than hold up. Then she said goodbye and walked toward the elevator. Michael and I stood in the corridor for another minute. He said he was going to call his office. I told him to take the afternoon. He said he might. He looked at me again, the way he had looked at me when he passed me during the recess, like he was trying to understand something that was still just outside the edge of what he could articulate. I didn't try to help him articulate it. Some things settle on their own schedule. I took the stairs down to the lobby and walked out through the main entrance onto the street. It was cold, and the wind off the river was coming through the buildings in the particular way it does in November in this city, cutting sideways and low. I turned up my collar and walked to where I had parked, 3 blocks north. I did not feel like celebrating. I felt like a man who had finished a long piece of work and was now, for the first time in 11 months, not thinking about it. I got in the car. I sat for a moment. Then I drove home. Lauren left the city 6 weeks after the judgment. I didn't know the exact date. I found out later from Michael, who had heard it from Patricia. She had rented a place somewhere outside Philadelphia, or maybe it was Wilmington. He wasn't sure, and I didn't ask him to find out. What I knew was that her firm had let her go within 10 days of the ruling. I'd heard about that from a man named Gerald Foss, a property manager I'd worked alongside for almost 8 years, who had a client in the same building where Lauren's company kept offices. Gerald mentioned it the way people mention things they think you already know offhandedly. While we were discussing an unrelated lease renewal, he said her name, said the firm had decided to move in a different direction, and then moved on to the next item on his list. I told him I understood. I did. Garrett Lauren's attorney, the man who had stood up in that courtroom and told Judge Harlan that the emails were fabricated, did not fare better. A colleague of mine, a woman named Sandra Chu, who had practiced real estate law for 20 years and knew most of the family court bar by reputation, mentioned his name to me in passing about 3 weeks after the ruling. She said the authentication challenge he had filed had become something of a reference point in the courthouse, not admiringly. She said that when an attorney tells a judge that server metadata and time-stamped header records are fabricated without a technical expert to support the claim, the judge remembers it. She said Garrett had 2 cases pending before Judge Harlan's court and that both opposing counsel were already aware of how the Calloway matter had gone. I said I was sorry to hear it. Sandra looked at me over her coffee cup and said she didn't think I was. The $200,000 in court-ordered restitution, the financial transfers Patricia had traced, and the judge had ruled, where marital asset dissipation was structured in payments over 18 months. Michael told me she had made the first one on time. He said it without satisfaction, just as a fact, the way you note that a contract clause has been triggered. He was already thinking about other things by then. By February, Michael had taken on a new client, a commercial real estate group out of Midtown that had been looking for outside counsel with a background in asset management and financial litigation. Patricia had recommended him. He called me the afternoon he signed the retainer agreement. I was in the middle of reviewing a permit filing, and he said, "Dad, I want to tell you something." I set the permit down. He said, "I signed the Midtown group today. It's the biggest retainer I've brought in since I made partner." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I told him I was glad. He said he was too. We talked for about 4 more minutes about nothing in particular, the weather, a building I was managing on Delaware Avenue, and then we said goodbye. After I hung up, I sat for a moment with the permit still on the desk in front of me, and I thought about Michael at 22. Studying for the bar exam at the kitchen table of his first apartment. Asking me once if I thought he had what it took. I had told him yes. I had believed it then. I believed it now. In March, about 4 months after the judgment, I was walking back from a property inspection on Spruce Street when I saw Evelyn Marsh. She was coming out of a coffee shop, pulling on her coat, and she looked up and saw me at the same moment I saw her. We both stopped. The sidewalk was busy. It was a Wednesday noon, and people moved around us the way water moves around something fixed. She said, "David." I said, "Evelyn." We stood there for a moment. She looked older than she had in the courtroom, or maybe just more tired, the particular tiredness that comes not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something for a long time. She said, "How is Michael?" I said, "He's well. He's working. He signed a significant new client in February." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "That's good." She looked down at the cup in her hand. "I don't hear from Lauren much. She's in Wilmington. She's working again, something in marketing. I think. She didn't tell me the details." She looked up. "She's angry with me. She'll be angry for a while." I said, "I imagine so." "I know it was the right thing," she said. Not defensively, just carefully, the way people say things they have said to themselves many times and are still in the process of fully believing. "I know it was, but knowing a thing is right doesn't make it easy to live with." I said, "No, it doesn't." We were quiet for a moment. Around us, the city went on doing what it does, the cabs, the delivery trucks, the particular sound of 11 million people conducting their lives. Evelyn looked at me and said, "She could have been different. I want you to know I believe that. She didn't start out this way." I said, "I know that, Evelyn." She said, "I'm sorry for what she put Michael through, and I'm sorry it took me as long as it did to say something." I told her what I believed, that she had said it when it mattered, in the room where it mattered, and that was not a small thing. She looked at me for a moment, and something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. She said goodbye. She walked north on Spruce Street. I watched her for a moment and then turned south toward my car. I thought about her as I drove back to the office. 2 parents, sitting on opposite sides of something that had already happened, trying to understand how it had happened and what they were responsible for. I didn't have clean answers to either of those questions. I didn't think she did either. But she had stood up in that courtroom, and that was something I would not forget. She had rented a place somewhere outside Philadelphia, or maybe it was Wilmington. He wasn't sure, and I didn't ask him to find out. What I knew was that her firm had let her go within 10 days of the ruling. I'd heard about that from a man named Gerald Foss, a property manager I'd worked alongside for almost 8 years, who had a client in the same building where Lauren's company kept offices. Gerald mentioned it the way people mention things they think you already know offhandedly. While we were discussing an unrelated lease renewal, he said her name. Said the firm had decided to move in a different direction, and then moved on to the next item on his list. I told him I understood. I did. The $200,000 in court-ordered restitution, the financial transfers Patricia had traced, and the judge had ruled were marital asset dissipation was structured in payments over 18 months. Michael told me she had made the first one on time. He said it without satisfaction, just as a fact, the way you note that a contract clause has been triggered. He was already thinking about other things by then. By February, Michael had taken on a new client, a commercial real estate group out of Midtown that had been looking for outside counsel with a background in asset management and financial litigation. Patricia had recommended him. The case was substantial, the kind that generates referrals if handled well, and Michael handled it well. I heard about it in increments, the way I hear about most things in his life. Now a sentence here, a detail there, the picture assembling itself slowly over months. He didn't announce it. He just became, over the course of that winter and spring, a man who was working again at full capacity. I could hear it in the way he spoke when he called. The hesitation that had been in his voice since August of the previous year was gone. He didn't talk about what had happened publicly, not to his colleagues, not at the professional events he attended, not in any of the ways that people sometimes talk about their difficulties once those difficulties are behind them. I respected that. It was his story to tell or not tell, and he chose not to tell it, and that was the right choice. I kept my own routine. I went to the office. I reviewed leases, managed transitions, handled the paperwork that comes with properties changing hands. In March, I worked on a building sale in the financial district that took 11 weeks to close and required 3 amendments to the original contract. In May, I helped negotiate a long-term commercial lease for a client who had been with me for 14 years. The work was the same work. It had always been patient, detail-oriented, conducted mostly in writing, in rooms that smelled like recycled air and old carpet. I liked it. I had always liked it. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. Not Gerald, not the attorney who had helped me think through the document strategy in the fall, not the people I had lunch with occasionally. The ones who had known me for decades and who asked, sometimes, how Michael was doing. I said he was doing well. He was. The folder stayed in my filing cabinet until April. I had put it there the evening of the judgment and hadn't opened it since. In April, when I was reorganizing the cabinet to make room for the Midtown transaction files, I came across it again. I sat down, put it on my desk, and opened it for the first time in 5 months. The emails were there, printed, dated, organized the way I had organized them 11 months before. The documentation of the transfers, the timeline Patricia had used as the foundation of her financial motion, the notes I had made in the margins, in my handwriting, small and even. I read through it for about 10 minutes. Not because I needed to remember anything, I remembered all of it, but because I wanted to look at it one more time before I put it away for good. I wanted to confirm that it was exactly what I had believed it to be when I first assembled it. Not a weapon, not a trap, but a record, evidence of something that had already happened, organized so that someone who needed it could use it. I closed the folder. I filed it in the back of the bottom drawer, behind the folders for closed cases that I keep for 7 years in case of audit. Then I closed the drawer. The following October, almost exactly 1 year after the day Michael had first called me, he called again. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was reading at the table near the window. The light was the same flat gray it had been that day, the kind of October light that doesn't come from any particular direction. He said, "Dad, I've been thinking about something." I said, "All right." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to think when everything was happening that you were being distant, that you weren't saying anything because you didn't know what to say, or because you thought it wasn't your place." He paused. I understand now that wasn't it. I waited. He said, "Your silence wasn't indifference. You were protecting me. The whole time, you were protecting me. You just didn't tell me you were doing it." I said, "I know you'd understand eventually. That's why I waited." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I think I would have done it wrong if you'd told me earlier. I think I needed to find it myself." I said, "Yes." That was most of the conversation. We talked for a little while longer about other things, a case he was working on, a property I was managing in the garment district, whether he was planning to come by for Thanksgiving. He said he was. I said I'd make the same thing I always made. He said that was fine. We hung up. I sat at the table for a while after the call ended. Outside, the light was fading the way it does in October, early and without ceremony. I thought about the morning, 11 months before, when I had looked at that folder on my desk and known, not hoped, not suspected, but known that what was inside it would be enough. I thought about the patience required to hold something like that for almost a year without using it, without saying anything, without giving Michael even a hint that the floor beneath Lauren's position was not as solid as she believed it to be. I had not been passive during that year. I had been present in a different way, watching, filing, waiting for the moment when the evidence I had gathered would be most useful to the person who needed it. That was what the work had been. Not intervention, not rescue. Something quieter than that and, I believed, more durable. Michael had found it himself. In the end, he had hired Patricia. He had walked into that courtroom. He had sat at that table and watched the evidence laid out in front of a judge who had seen every version of every story and was not surprised by any of them. He had done that. I had only made sure he had what he needed to do it. The work was done. It had been done since November, since the moment I drove home through that cold, sideways wind off the river and felt, for the first time in nearly a year, that I was not carrying anything. But it is one thing to know work is finished and another to hear, from the person you did it for, that it landed the way you intended. I got up from the table, I put the book away, washed the cup I'd been drinking from, and turned off the lamp by the window. The room was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what it always does, moving, transacting, generating the low, continuous noise of 11 million people going about their lives. I went to bed at my usual time. I slept well.